Hello, everyone. How are you? Sitting down comfortably. Do not fall asleep. So this is what I tell children when I do an afternoon session: is it's okay to fall asleep as long as you don't snore, because that will disrupt me. Right. Okay. We're going to be talking about writing and illustrating picture books. And we have an amazing panel here: Rikin, Smriti, and Krina. They're going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. Yeah?
Hello.
No, you keep this.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rikin Parekh. I'm an illustrator and sometimes author. I'm still trying to figure out the author bit. But yeah, usually I work on picture books and middle grade. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Smriti Halls, sometimes Prasadam Halls, and I write picture books. I've been working in children's publishing for a long time, nearly 25 years. And half of that, the first half was as an editor, and then the second half so far has been as a writer. And I've written lots of books.
Hello everyone, Krina Patel-Sage. I'm an author, illustrator of picture books. I started my career as a designer in publishing in 2012, and I just moved into writing and illustrating.
Great, because that is a good segue to our first question. It's a craft question. Is how do you approach writing your picture books, whether you're an author illustrator or an illustrator? How does ideas come if you're illustrating somebody else's book? But how do you, if you're just writing, where do you start? Do you start with character? It's an idea. Where is that coming from?
Should I, since I have the mic? So
you want to hold it closer?
Sometimes the idea just comes fully formed, like J.K. Rowling had with Harry Potter. Should I mention that? Yeah, no, sorry. Guys, I have ADHD and no filter, so just excuse anything that I might say. Yeah, and other times I start with characters and build the story around that and try to think of themes I want to include, and sometimes the ending comes before the actual story. So it's like a variety of ways depending on the book.
I think I'm like Krina actually, in that it's a varied approach. I think more often than not, the story finds me. I think that very often a story presents itself, and I want to grab it, and I want to write it down, and there's real excitement. But obviously, it isn't always like that, and I have lots of books which are commissioned, so books that I'm contracted to do. And those are a bit daunting often because I know that those deadlines are coming up and I'm slightly terrified. And the ones that are hardest of all for me, I think, are the ones which are sequels to other books or books which have been really successful. And I feel a huge amount of anxiety, I think, about wanting to please the readers that have already loved those characters and the publisher and myself. So I feel quite a lot of stress about those books that I don't feel about new ideas that come and present themselves to me when I'm supposed to be writing a different story.
I think for myself, it's usually a character from a doodle or a drawing, because most of the time I'm drawing or doodling, and a character will just create itself. Then I try to connect it with possibly something that's happened in my life, or a funny instance. Like right now, I've got a new nephew, and he'll be one on Tuesday. So I've got a story about him and his dog, Nanu, which means small dog. So that character has come out from him. So I try to take it from real life, but usually it's from a doodle. Like with Fly Tiger Fly, initially it was a monster that had dreams of flying, But then when I got with my agent Claire, she said, "What if we do a cat because you like animals?" And the cat evolved into a tiger because I like tigers, and that became a jungle as opposed to a forest. That's how they.
That's interesting. So how does that change if you're given somebody else's text? Have you illustrated anybody else's text?
I've done a poetry anthology for Matt Goodfellow. So what's the original?
Yeah, so I'm asking both of you, what do you do when you get a text? How do you start when you get a text?
I have a very visual mind. So when I read, the picture comes into my head, and then I go about drawing.
With me, yeah, I usually read the text, and because of my sense of vision is usually quite sequential, because I come from quite a filmic background, because I used to work in films doing storyboards, and like many of you guys, I've watched, like Jules and Spider-Man, and all these kind of cartoon characters and things, and I just grew up with those kind of things. So everything from that day one has always been visual. So I'd see things as a film. So when I'm reading the text, I can see, the board, or the visuals, and the characters and the shots. And if it's a wide shot, if it's a long shot, if it's a close up, if it's just a series of drawings with white background. But yeah, usually it's the reading is the most important part, I think, and that everything else builds on top of that.
That then leads me to the question: do you actually ever get to speak to the author, and does the author get to speak to the illustrator while in production, or while you are, at least when you have drafts? Do you get to do that at all?
Yeah, so for all my books, I've always reached out to the authors, and they've been really excited to be working with me, and I've been really excited to be working with them. And I always try to get a wee bit of them into the drawings. So sometimes, like my current picture book I'm doing with Alistair Chisholm, he's got a cat called Maud. So it's a picture book with Walker. So I put Maud in the picture book. It's supposed to be a surprise for him, but I think he probably already knows that.
This is going live.
Same with Iguana Boy, with the middle grade black and white book that I first started with. I put James, the author, his son's names on like cars as number plates. So I always try to talk with the author and put some of their life into the drawings, because I know in the future when they look at those books, they'll know that it's their story, and there's a wee bit of them in those illustrations.
You put yourself in it?
Sneakily, I might draw myself. Yeah.
There you go.
I love that. That's so great. I think that's absolutely gorgeous. I think it really varies from book to book in terms of the way that I've collaborated with the illustrator. But usually, I think that you don't often have any connection with an illustrator before your book has actually been published. And although that seems strange because you're creating this baby together, really, I think there are lots of good reasons for that to happen. And I think it's beneficial actually sometimes to both author and illustrator, because I think that having your art director and your editor as sort of intermediaries between you is really great, because even if you have met each other, even if you know each other slightly and you really like each other, doing a professional job together is hard. And there might be things that, you want to say, and you shouldn't have to worry about how to put that. Your editor can do that for you. I think with some books that I've made, I've met the illustrator right at the beginning, and with other books, I've only met them on book 2 or book 3 or something like that. But I think it's a really it's kind of project by project. It's different how it goes. But what I do think is that somehow it's important to try and convey, whether that's directly to the illustrator or actually much more commonly to your editor. I suppose if there's something very much that you feel as the writer during the writing of this book, or just something that you want the illustrator to know. I think it's important to say it, and I think it's something I didn't do at the beginning because I really didn't want to interfere with what was going to happen with the illustrations, and I wanted the illustrator to really feel that they had, full prerogative to do, to make the book their own. But actually, it is important to know. Perhaps it's simply to know how a story came about or where it was born
The origins
from.
of it.
Yeah. And I think there is value in that if that's sort of, if that's relevant to say.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Rikin and Smriti have said, because the last 3 books have been author illustrator titles. So I've put so much of myself, my own experience. I've snuck my kids into them, and I think the first book I illustrated was for the poet Matt Goodfellow. I illustrated an anthology, and I think it would have been really nice to have had that conversation and to have got his perspective on where the poems came from. So you wrote a poem about a river. Which river was it? Were there any particular features? But instead, I was kind of just left to my own devices. And I do worry if I misinterpret things he said, or, so I think communication is always good, I feel, in any situation.
I think that kind of leads to this question, which I face quite a lot, is you're writing from your culture. Let's say your picture book has some connections to it, but the chosen illustrator is either not from that heritage or from, as we talked in the publishers panel, the broad South Asian heritage, and they are not nuanced enough to be from the same part of the world that you are from or the religion you're from. Then both as writers and illustrators, how do you approach that? How do you do research? How do you go about then being authentic and accurate? Because what you don't want is your name is on the page, on the front of the page or on the covers, right? So you still have to be authentic. It still needs to be correct. But then how do you go about, as an illustrator, then how do you make sure that it is authentic?
I haven't had the chance yet to do that. I had a wee bit of a chance with Fly Tiger Fly. I think it's probably because the right book hasn't come along yet, or I haven't written it yet.
My book is waiting in your queue.
But for Fly Tiger Fly, I managed to put like my brother's name Rohan, and my sister's name Sheena, and my good friend who passed away, Sagar. So I managed to put their names into the book. But I think for future books, I think I'll just put as much of my culture and my background into those books. Going back to my nephew's picture book I have, I know what I'm going to do. There's going to be because he's half Swedish, so there's going to be Swedish things and lots of Gujarati Indian things. And obviously we're going to have Nanu, the dog. Nanu means small. So that's what they call her, Nanu. That's her name. So.
But you did the Horrible Histories book.
Totally Chaotic History.
Yeah. No, the one with Greg Jenner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then how do you do that research for that?
Luckily, Walker, they got an expert. So for the first book, they had Dr. Campbell Price. So luckily, they just sent me PDFs of, what things that should be drawn, and how they should look. So I didn't have to do so much research on that, luckily, because it's nonfiction. Obviously, when it's to do with my background or something, I've got everything at my disposal, and obviously my parents, everyone. I think, I think those books are still coming from my end. I've just been so busy illustrating so many other people's books. I had to talk to my agent last week, and she said, "Okay, Rick, I think next year we have to try and push your books because you've been illustrating people's books a wee bit too long." So I've got all these ideas. They just need to.
Yay, we're waiting for that.
Yeah.
Everybody's offering you a mic.
So that's an interesting question, and I think it's I think different things have happened with different books that I've worked on, where so I've written lots of picture books where there are children. I try for them always to be children of colour, and I try where possible, really, which is almost all, for them to be South Asian children, because I have been horrified by the statistics, the CLP statistics, year after year after year, and it never seems to get picked up in any kind of headline that percentage never even reaches 1. And yet when I do school visits, I see classrooms full of South Asian children. So it's sort of difficult for me. I spent that first half of my career as in acquisitions meetings, in publishing meetings, having those awful conversations where you put your hand up and say, oh, but wouldn't it be really nice if this character was brown or black? It would be really, great. And having those, we talked this morning a little bit about how actually publishing has a lot to do with making money after all, and actually having that kickback about, well, that would be fantastic, and of course we would want to do that, but we've got Swedish partners, and we've got all of Scandinavia, we've got a potential deal on this series of 4 board books, and they won't take them if they've not got just a cast of white characters. So actually, to come from that kind of background to where we are now, where we've seen such movement in the last 7 years in illustrated books, at least, where with significant main characters as children of colour, is really, really extraordinary, but there aren't enough South Asian ones. And so I have made that my real kind of mission, to see for that visibility to be there. And I've grown in confidence as the years have gone, as the books have progressed across the last 5 years, about being much more vocal about, and being because I think editors always want you to make the book that you want to make, and they always want to assist you, but actually it's embarrassing to have the conversation sometimes. It's sort of and you say, this looks great, but actually could there be a bit more luminosity in the skin color here, because actually brown is not just brown, right? And that actually you have to sort of pluck up quite a lot of courage to say that. I know that sounds ridiculous, but actually to talk in such bold terms when you're having a lovely editorial meeting, it just seems I don't know, it's awkward. But I've grown in confidence about that, because I know that everybody wants to make the best book that will reach people and in the right way and make readers really excited. So it's worth having those conversations. And I'm really happy that publishers have embraced that in so many ways. And in fact, with one book, I was really I think the illustrator had done a great job, but I really did feel that there was something about the way that the color was printing that didn't feel right in the skin tones. And so they tried it a lot of different ways for me, and then sent me, huge proof of lots of different variations where they turn things up and down so that we could find the right balance. And I know that, that's really kind of drilling down to the kind of most basic thing, but it is important. Where there isn't enough representation, then I think let's make it really great where it is. And so there's that sort of thing. And I suppose that's working with illustrators who don't share the same heritage. But really recently, I've worked with Chaya Prabhat, who is living in Goa and is South Indian like me, and that was really amazing to make a book together. And that is a book about being dual heritage. My children are both Indian and English, and I really wanted to write, just something that was filled with, all the joy of everything that they are, that they get to be both, not half, that they get to be completely Indian, completely English, if that's what, they aren't half of anything, they aren't a quarter of anything, they're entirely themselves. And to collaborate with her was really interesting, because she, when I said, it would be so lovely for it to be full of sari silk and mangoes and whatever, all the little sort of things from memory that I wanted to put from the Indian side of me, she was just sending sort of roughs of these things over, and it made my heart leap. It was just, there was no real having to, she just knew it and did it. And it was an amazing experience. And I sent her some photographs of sari borders from some of my mum's, old, some of the saris I remember that she used to wear when I was, really little. And, she incorporated some patterns in and stuff like that. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm in quite a privileged position culturally, because I born and brought up in London. I've experienced a lot of different cultures. So when I started working in publishing in 2012, I had a similar thing where they said, you have to have a white child on the cover, or we can't sell into Eastern Europe, things like that. I don't really want to go too much into that, but that made me determined to make my own books, to include all the kids I've grown up with, from Somali, African, all sorts. In Love Is All We Need, it kind of brings that all together. Love Is All We Need is one of my last picture book. I've got 6 families. They all live in a block of flats, like me and my sons. And there's a Jewish family and a Muslim family. Those 2 boys are best friends. It's kind of like an ideological thing. I don't know, so for want of a better, yeah. And it's 6 kids, and you just get to see inside their families. So they all share food, and I had to do research on like what they eat at Passover, Eid food, and then I put my own family. So you've got the Diwali stuff, and and in a way it just comes easily to me, because I've been to the houses of these different cultural friends, and I don't really have to do that much research. It just comes naturally. Whereas I think if someone has only experienced one culture, you can kind of tell that, like with the skin tone, I've seen books illustrated where the person almost looks grey. There's no kind of like proper kind of brownish tone. Whereas for me, it kind of comes naturally, because I see different skin tones all the time.
And that's something that CLB picked up in their reports as well, I think, on how the skin tone is shown across different books, and how just dabbing on a child with brown doesn't make that book an inclusive book.
I also made a point of including very dark children, because I think especially in Asian culture, there's so much colorism, even in the Bollywood films. Even in the songs, beautiful pale skin, but most of us are dark in India, so it just makes us feel bad about ourselves.
Wonder where that came from.
Yeah, obviously. But then coming here, it happens all over again, because you're then, growing up, all the magazines and things you're exposed to. So I made a point of representing dark-skinned Asian and Black characters.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think it is very encouraging, because I do a huge amount of illustration references whenever I send in my manuscript, because we don't want them to be drawing something else totally different. So let me come to a craft question again from that very big topic. Do writers, and there's a question for the illustrators, do writers need to know panels, vignettes, page turns? How useful is that to a designer and an illustrator, if you break it down or not, if you understand why the page turns are? Does that make any difference, or shall we just give you a blob of text and you will figure it out?
I think it does need to be addressed. I think they do need to know a wee bit about page turns and things, because that's the way a story can be told. But I guess then there's a certain amount of fluidity in knowing So if the author does know about page turns and all these kind of things, and they can relate to how the illustrator might work, I think it does make a difference if the author does know things of that craft.
What do you want to say and then give it to Smriti?
Sorry.
No, you do it.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to disagree, Rikin, sorry.
Good.
I like the challenge of getting a blob of text. I used to get a lot of blobs of like really well-written text when I was a designer, and the challenge was, as a designer, how do I condense sort of, which bits do I illustrate, which bits do I show and what, so I did a course last year on children's book illustration, and one thing our tutor would always say was, if you say it, don't show it.
Sure.
So if the kids are reading something, show something different, because you can almost have an in-joke, like in terms of they're saying something and you're seeing something completely different, like the cat's doing something, or and that's how you can get humor, especially into picture books.
Yeah, I think that's great, but I do think that when the text comes to an illustrator, it has actually been laid out by the editor and the art director, and I think that's a big. and that's their craft. That is their joy, is to get a text, however it comes, either laid out in spreads or in a big block, and to find the pacing and to work with the author on editing that to the best it can be, and then laying it out for the illustrator to approach in a way that has the page turns and suggestions, perhaps the vignettes and things like that. But I don't think that that's crucial I think the writer has to make sure they understand the intrinsic kind of shape of their story, and then deliver it the very best way they can. And if that includes some suggestions about perhaps where a page turn would be, or perhaps this might be nice to see or perhaps we'd have a little vignette of that. But I think it's just a kind of, maybe that would be nice. That's a suggestion that I have in my mind. But I don't think that as the author you're ever kind of prescribing how the thing will be laid out
on the page, yeah.
Because I think
but it's good to know whether you have enough for 12 spreads, whether you have a story that carries through in a way that can be illustrated on all of those pages, isn't it?
Yeah.
So is then writing so easy that we just write a block of text? Writing picture books are far easier than all these middle grade YA people writing big books. What do you think? You all have written, right?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't say because, I haven't written them. YA or middle grade, mega blockbuster one day. But I would say that each picture book has its own way of being born, and then it has its own gestation, has its own time coming into being. And sometimes that is, oh my gosh, I've got to get this down, and I can get a first draft down. Yeah, maybe sometimes in a day, but it would be very rudimentary, and I'd go back and polish it up lots of times. But I have to say there are other books that I've carried in my head and in my heart for a year, 2 years. They have had to wait until they were ready. And I think some of those most successful, Rain Before Rainbows, for example, which was so beautifully illustrated by David Litchfield, was a book that I knew those lines, those first lines, and I heard them in my head as I would, walk to school and back and stuff like that. But the book was definitely not ready to be written because it felt so deeply rooted in me that I just had to sort of hold it for a long time. And then when it was ready to write, it came very naturally and I was able to send it off. But it had to have that amount of time to grow and be the thing before it could be written down. So I think it really varies in terms of writing. I don't know if you want to say.
So I'm still trying to figure out how to write a good picture book. I've done one, and that took quite a long time. So I have sent text to my agent, and she's got back to me saying it's great, but the middle part needs more working. So my the text seemed to be a wee bit too quick. So I think I find it quite difficult to write. Maybe it's because I'm more of an illustrator and I see things more visually. But then I did enjoy writing when I was in school. I remember I got like my history teacher read out my account of a historic thing that I made up, and I was like, wow, that's my writing. She's reading it out.
So did you send her the Greg Jenner book and say,
Yeah.
look?
That's a good idea.
That's great.
That's a good idea. I should do that. I personally find it easy to write down like a quick summary of the story, like in like 12 points, like 12 spreads. Then I can like work my way in between those spreads and try to buffer them out a wee bit. Or sometimes I do like what Sean Connery does in Finding Forrester. You write down everything you want to write down, just let it all out. So it's out of your system. Then I kind of leave it for a few days, then go back to it and say, well, that's crap, or that doesn't work, or that's really good. They kind of like, shave it down. I find it quite difficult. I mean, I usually get the idea, like I want like, the boy to become a monkey at the end of the story or something. But it's just the middle part of that whole process I find a wee bit difficult. But yeah,
That's where the art is,
yeah.
isn't it?
It for me different again for every book. So sometimes it is a complete thing and you get it all down in a day. But as Smriti said, that's just the first draft, and you always go back, and then the editor will make changes. With A to Z, it was inspired by my kids, as most of my books are. That I got that down in a day. So all of the things from A to Z. But later on, I decided to put them all into haiku format, which kind of tied it all together because it fits with the kind of calm, mindful theme. And then I tied all the bits together with the 5 ways to well-being. So that was another kind of factor. With the latest book I'm working on, it's a story. The characters came first for this one. So I started drawing elephants, and then I drew an elephant and a mouse, kind of like their friendship. And then it turned into something different. And again, I put one of my kids as the mouse and the elephant friend, and it became like a fully formed story, which is basically so many of my stories, so much of my life goes into them. And I think that's what brings authenticity, which is why it's important to have a diverse range of creators. Someone said at the beginning about how there was a lot more diversity in picture books, but what we really need is more diversity in the creators, because we should be the ones to tell our own stories, and I think that's crucial. I was actually I was seeing it after the CLP research. I was saying, oh yeah, they've put a lot of darker skinned characters in the books now, but who's writing them? And it was a little bit frustrating to see that. But yeah, hopefully better things to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all this is all part of that, isn't it? Lifting each other up
Absolutely.
And being able to have the platform and finding the sales, finding people to read our books. So, but both of you write rhyming text as well, right? And often newbie writers are told not to write rhyming text, or you won't get published with the rhyming text. Start with something else and then get into it. So what do you think, from both as an editor and as a writer, Smriti, how would you do that?
So I think there are good reasons why new writers get told that, and I think it's to encourage you to write, and to encourage you to really know what your story is, because rhyme is so often a false friend. We love to read it. We love to read well-written verse, short, and it trips off the tongue and it has a great pace. And sometimes it's then a bit tempting to think, oh, I'll have a go at that, and not do your best work. And I think the thing is, when you're being told not to write in verse, it's not, we can't, if that's a blanket no. It's simply, if you're going to write in verse, it has to be really good. It has to be perfect, the meter, the scansion. You have to go back 100 times and do that again and make sure you don't trip over anything and get someone else to read it out loud and make sure they don't trip over anything. And the other thing is that when you write in verse, sometimes it will lead you away somewhere else that actually is really just tangential or just really random.
For the sake of the rhyme.
For the sake of the rhyme,
wander.
suddenly it kind of wanders off, the giant had a big belly and then he had jelly and then he wore a welly and, obviously I want to write this book now, but the thing is, if you do decide to write in verse, I think the thing is to then go back and see if you could write that story in prose and check and see whether that is still a sort of story worth its salt. Does it have the shape? Does it have the structure? Does it have all the beats that you want it to have? And then go back and look at your verse and refine it and fine tune it and make sure it sings and make sure it's just exactly, just every word is polished up and working as hard as it can be. Because I don't think I think when editors say, they want to see things in prose, it's because quite often you can get the story that you want to write, perhaps you can convey it better in prose. There is also the consideration about co-editions. So highly illustrated books are very costly to make. And the best way to do that is to get as many foreign deals as you can so that you can publish at the same time. So you can print that first print run on at the same time, and that helps to kind of spread the costs and so on and so forth. It goes without saying that if you're submitting a story which is in rhyming text, that presents some issues. It can present some issues for foreign publishers, but it doesn't always, because number one, they can turn that story into a prose story. And secondly, if they really love it, they will take it and they will pay for a translator, miraculously, to turn it into rhyming text in their own language. So I've got a series called I'm Sticking With You with Simon and Schuster,
series.
and which is gorgeously illustrated by Steve Small. And I think it's in maybe close to 30 languages. And most of those are in rhyming text. And in Germany, they have had that text translated by their Julia Donaldson equivalent. So actually he carries his name on the front as well as us, because actually they've refined it as much as they can so that it works in German as well as it does in English. And so if a publisher really, really wants to go for it with a rhyming text, they will. I mean, they will. But I think that advice to when you'll start, I think it's much more about when you're starting, when you want to get those stories out. The worst thing would be if you've got a great story and then it gets dismissed out of hand because actually the verse wasn't good enough, right? But the story might have been great, but maybe it's not going to get through because actually somebody got put off because actually they thought, oh, this is a bit shoddy, the scansion isn't quite right, I'm not going to.
And you can put off the first read, especially if it's submitted without an agent.
Yeah.
And if you're submitting to an agent and they don't like that, they might not even send it in. So I think it's that first pass that needs to get on, isn't it?
But if you feel comfortable and if you write, lots like that anyway, then and if that is how the book presents itself to you, then that's how you've got to go.
Yeah, so my last book was written in rhyming text, but I would say it was non-fiction. It was a book about love, and kind of every spread worked as one. I wasn't trying, because I'm a lot newer in my career than Smriti, to writing. So I didn't have to write the whole story as like a rhyming thing. So it was just each kind of double page. The characters all flowed through, but it fitted with the feeling of the book, which is why I chose it, which is why I chose haiku for A to Zen. And for my latest book, it's a very sensitive story, and it's just written in prose. It's just straight prose.
Did you want to say anything?
No.
It's like, when I write rhyme, I will.
Maybe when I do my next book, or if I have another book, or if I do it in rhyming slang, maybe. I did initially when I first started writing. I had like a whole picture book text, and it was in rhyming sort of thing, but it just didn't work. And one of my friends saw it and said, "Rick, this just don't show it to anyone."
Surely. I think that was exactly my next question going to be. Do you guys have critique groups, workshop groups where you share your text before you share it with your agents or your editors? Do you, even if it's illustration, do you have somebody to share anything, or have you reached a confidence level where you can directly send it to your agent?
When I first started, I joined Squibbie, and they were really helpful, and they still are. I'm not a member, I don't think anymore, but when I did join them, I joined the Crit group, and I made some really good friends there. Cheryl Webster was one of them, and I would send her some of my texts, and she would give me feedback. So I found it really helpful to get, feedback from her. Then we could also put the text into the Crit group, and all other authors could give feedback, what worked, what didn't work, and that was really cool. That really helped me, I think. But nowadays, I don't have that much time to show any work, because I haven't had time to write anything. But
you are going to.
I'm going to. But if I do, I have one friend, Matt Robertson. He's a really good illustrator, so he's done quite a good few picture books. So I do kind of like, just throw in text if I have any. I haven't had him in a long time, but he's the one I'm going to be throwing text at and say, Matt, come on, I need some feedback, because he's really quite good at
Was
that.
he the one who told you not to show it to anybody?
No, that was another one.
I get really shy about showing my work, and in fact, my agent generally has to like prize things out of my hands, because I'll say, oh yes, no, I did write something a few weeks ago, but it's not ready, it's not ready to send. I just have to tinker a little bit more. When I first sent my very first few texts out, because I had a career in publishing, and I knew lots of other editors, obviously, I actually ended up sending those 2 texts to the only publishing house where I knew that I did not know anybody, because I was so worried that it might just be the biggest load of pants that was ever written, and I just didn't want anyone that I knew to ever have seen any of it.
But they got published.
No, it was all fine. It was fine. But I've retained a bit of that. I think I still feel quite kind of self-conscious, and so I don't have a critique group or anything, but I have a very brave husband who is my first reader for everything, and he has changed his style a lot over the years. I mean, he learned quite quickly that you have to be quite careful what you say to somebody when you first read it. They hand it over to you is quite a precious thing, and being completely honest is perhaps not the way to go. You start off with, yeah, I really liked it, and yeah, I can totally see where this is going. How about is a good way to start, and I think I might have written that down for him somewhere. So you can always start like that. So he's actually the only person who ever sees anything before I send it.
Amazing.
When I started out, I felt quite alone. When I wrote A to Zen, my youngest was 4 weeks old, so I was very isolated. Then lockdown kicked off, and I've just felt very much like I'm someone who needs to share my stuff. I feel it's much better when you can share your creative work. So I was very lucky. Last year I did the advanced children's book illustration course at City Lit. Actually, I read Mallory Blackman's autobiography, and she said she'd done some courses there, so that inspired me. And it was fantastic. We had 3 different tutors. They each gave me different input about my style and also on writing. And then, of course, my classmates, we could all share stuff. I definitely say my work's improved more in that sort of 8 months than it had over the whole sort of 5 years that I was writing before. So it's good to share.
Amazing. I'm going to ask if there are questions in the audience and if there's anything on the live stream as well. You want to take the red one or the one? Hey, we've covered everything. Nobody has any questions.
There's one question. Here we go.
Thank you, everyone. That was really, really interesting. I teach creative writing for children at university at Exeter, and through our module we go from picture book all the way up to YA, and they write everything. And really, genuinely, my students find picture books the hardest. So I do want to just emphasise there is so much skill in that panel there. So I was wondering about the role of the animal picture book. And what do you feel about it? And have you found yourself not wanting to do them or I mean, I know there have been, some of you have done them and not, but I just find them a really interesting form and how do you, anyway, I think it's something that I'd like to hear from you about.
Yes, I'm just quickly repeat the question for the podcast. So Nazneen is asking what is the thing behind putting animals in picture books, and do you ask for it? Do they do it?
Most of my picture books are animal based. The most current one I'm doing right now was human based, but I find it quite difficult to draw humans in a good way that relates to picture books, because I think to do humans in like middle grade or black and white fiction is a wee bit different than picture books, because when you do picture book humans, they have to be quite picture booky, if that makes sense.
Lots of movement.
Movement, and they have to just look right. And I've tried it, and it just looks quite wrong. I personally love drawing animals, so all my books tend to be animals, and I just find them much more fun. And I think children can relate much better to animals, especially when you go to the zoo. You see all these animals, and that always comes back to me. So yeah, I forgot the question, but yeah, I like drawing animals. But in my next picture book, I want to draw more humans, and especially children of color, and have my nephew in there. He has to be in there. He has to be in there now.
I think it's an interesting question, and I think that I think we've had a lot of interesting conversations about this, especially with CLP as well. I think it's really different for different texts, and I think they present themselves quite often to me. Some of them just absolutely have to be human, and it makes sense. And one of the things that I've really wanted to bring out with human characters, where I've used South Asian children, is that, guess what? South Asian kids can be activists, they can be explorers, they can be adventurers, they can have all of the kind of amazing experiences that every single child has. Guess what? They don't have a narrative which is based around some kind of oppression or, being different or wanting to be accepted or something. They are, have tons of agency and loads of exciting stories that they're part of. But lots of the stories that I've written have got usually anthropomorphized animals in, and sometimes that's been because, so for example, coming back to why I'm sticking with you, that was very definitely, I wanted something that was very small and it was a squirrel, and then something that was immense and it was a bear, and the dynamic between them is sort of based around their difference, and it's based on size as well, and based on size of personality, and how big personalities can sometimes take up all of the room, and sometimes to be little and fierce, and sometimes, in relationship, you're trying to find that balance, and sometimes that was something that was only possible to me to express through animals. And when I write anything that feels really edgy or political, I will always use animals. So when I wrote The Little Island, which was illustrated by Robert Starling, which was an anti-Brexit book, if you like, and got absolutely loads of media attention, that had to be animals, because I was writing something quite, if we'd had people that, I got invited on to Good Morning Britain for that, but imagine if there had been humans in that. It was a book talking about sort of building bridges, perhaps isolationism not being the best route all the time. But I used ducks and geese and a farm, and it was much more possible to bring humour into the story. It was much more possible to it's more disarming when you've got a funny goose who's marching off in a strop than if you had, a human being. And so I think sometimes you can really push boundaries more when you're using creatures, and we're laughing at the same time as kind of thinking big thoughts and about kind of big ideas.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for both. Some of my kids' favourite books are Animals, Tiger Who Came to Tea, Hungry Caterpillar, and Oh No, George. And we talk about books being relatable. My youngest relates so much to George and his kind of desperation to not be naughty and that kind of feeling. But then we also have a job to do in terms of representation. So I'd say both. There's a place for all books. I was hearing a lot that books should be funny and we don't want to push issues onto kids and, just make them all about funny bears. But, let's not silence anyone. Let's let everyone make the books they want to make and tell their stories. And you'd be surprised what kids will pick up in the library and what they'll actually be interested in. So yeah, I'd say write what you want to write from your heart, and don't be disheartened.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, there you
Maybe just share some memorable experiences in your picture book or illustration journey, maybe one each.
Trying to think. Maybe.
Like making logo for Sailfest.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. You go.
Maybe when I wrote Fly, Tiger, Fly, that was just the time that I was working in Borders as a bookseller, and we just got put into administration. So everyone had no jobs, and we were, like putting all the books away, and things were going to be sold next day for 10, 20p. And it was a really depressing time, and I was with my friend, and we were just, shelving recovery, as we used to call it. And I had this idea of this monster that wanted to fly, because I've always dreamt of flying. Fly, Tiger, Fly was born through that experience of going through administration and Borders. Brain Cross, if anyone was there. And many years later became a tiger. Whenever I see that book, I think of Borders administration. But it was fun.
Top that.
No, one of my first books that I wrote was called I Love You Night and Day, and it had it became a US big hit, and people read it lots at their weddings and things, and I used to get lots of requests for people to use it. It was really one of those really lovely things, because it was like a huge success, but it also clearly meant a lot of things to a lot of people. So it became part of their stories, and we find pictures in magazines where people had used it as the theme for their wedding and stuff like that. It was amazing. But a few years after that, I got an email from a prison warden, or a woman working in the mental health department at a Texas prison. And she said, I'm just writing to you because we work with level 3 male offenders, and we wanted you to know that we just bought a job lot of this book, and we're using it with these men to help them to try and reach out to the families that they are not connected with at home. And we're also using it as a way for them to open up about their feelings, about trying to get them to connect with how they feel about, just a whole multitude of things. And it completely blew my mind, because although we talk loads and loads about the power of picture books and the power of, children's books, and they do all sorts of things, I had always thought about them in terms of just, I suppose, the contexts that I knew, the great ways that they enhanced reading and learning and family life, and in all of the ways I understood. Or they might be at weddings or christenings or things like that. But this idea that far away in another country, in a prison, that words that I had written in my living room with one child on my hip and another one crawling on the floor or something had meant something, and had sort of was bringing together families that were separated in a context that I just had never really thought about. It just completely blew my mind. So now I do lots of work with prisoners here in the UK, because actually it really brought home to me that idea that picture books lend those words. There are so few words in them, but if they are the right ones, they can change lives, they can bring hope, they can do these miraculous things, and they can bring together families, they can bring together relationship. And that was as a moment, I think that was like one of those kind of really life-changing moments for me, to think about kind of what it is that we do and how words heal and how words help and kind of bring wholeness.
That's amazing.
I don't think I'm going to say anything as profound as that. That was amazing.
Please say something funny.
I've got nothing funny either. I'm going to talk about something that some of you who are starting out, and maybe some of you who have been in the industry a while, might feel, and that's about imposter syndrome. So for me, I never feel like a proper author or a proper illustrator. So anytime I get invited to something like this, I was like, what? You want me? Was Rashmi not available? Like, just like filling in. Sorry. But seeing my books in shops, and then Caterpillar Cake was nominated for a Clipper Award. And after the award, I met Michael Rosen, who hosted the ceremony. And I said to him, you came to my school and you were really funny. And then Charlotte Hackling came up behind and said, Krina, tell him you're the illustrator of this book. And he was like, Krina, you must say your name. Be proud of who you are. And that stayed with me ever since. I was talking to Smriti about feeling anxious about posting on social media. And every time I post, I think, oh God, people are going to think, not her again. She's just showing off about her books again. And, but we should not be afraid to put ourselves out there. We're just as valid as anybody else. And also, I met Jacqueline Wilson at an event. I was doing an event and I got to go to her event, which was before mine. And I got her to sign my copy of Double Trouble from 1996 or something. And it was just a beautiful full circle moment. I showed her in the program where her book cover was next to my book cover. And my kids were there to see it. And they kept, I think someone asked me, which child is it for? And I said, no, it's for me. And she wrote to Krina, sister writer, and that just, it was just affirming, I don't think I'll ever believe it. But yeah, moments like that, and seeing your books in bookshops as well, make it all kind of worthwhile.
Amazing. With that wonderful note, you have one more question, Sanchita? We run out of time. Sorry, Sanchita, you don't know any of these people. Great, thank you so much, Rikin, Smriti, and Krina.